In this video, I'll go over the different layer options as well as the blending options and how they can be tweaked and changed in the various channels in Substance Painter. So when we're texturing stuff in Substance Painter, we primarily work with the two layer options, which is paint, which you can see here with the paintbrush icon, and a fill layer. So I'll start with the paint one first. So paint is essentially where you paint directly onto the model itself. So you see I have one here right now. I've made it red and you can see my cursor and you can see that I can actually paint directly onto this model. Now, a lot of times when people use the paint layer, it's for a few reasons. One, you can use it when you're creating masks, so you can mask out certain areas using paint functions or just bringing some extra details. But a lot of times when you're using the paint tool, it might be for, like, say, manual touch-ups on some of the procedural layers. It could also be there to add in some more subtle sort of like details like scratches, dirt. Could also be added in there for decals as well. So you might want to go in there to kind of manually add those sort of extra details onto your model. Whereas here we have the fill layer, and the fill layer essentially fills the whole model or the whole texture shader with whatever texture, material, shader, or color that you've chosen. So for instance, right now, this fill layer is gray. I'll just change it to, say, a blue, and you can see that it's filled the whole uh, head shader with this blue. Now, a lot of times you're going to find yourself using primarily fill layers and then using, say, generators and masks to kind of add in those sort of finer details, and then you might touch them up a little bit with a paint layer. So you're always kind of flicking back and forth between the two, but I find you'll probably mostly be working within fill layers. Now, in both the paint and fill layers, you'll see you have different channels that you can enable and disable. I'll start off with the paint layer one first, just so it's a bit easier to see. So you have color, which is actually the actual color of the layer. You have the metallic options. You can make something that's metallic or not metallic. You can add roughness to it to say how smooth or rough a surface is. And you can use normal and heights to fake height and depth onto your models. So let me just change this to a white for right now, and I'll show you how it looks. So if I put this to, say, 1, and I put this to 0, so it's fully metallic and it's extremely smooth. If I just paint onto a model right now, you can see that the smoothness and the metallic elements are coming through here. Now, if I was to change the height, let's say increase the height here, and if I just paint there as well, you'll see now that there is a little bit of depth as well coming into the paint. So you can see now it's looking like it's extruding out. If I go the other way, it looks like it's kind of indented. So I can play around with these options to add metallic elements, roughness elements, or even give that illusion of height and depth by playing around with these channels. Now, a lot of times you wouldn't necessarily use all of these in a paint layer because you'll find that if I was to make some changes right now, so let's say this is completely smooth, you see it only affects the new strokes that I'm making. The original strokes still have those elements that I've added in before. Um, so that's where a fill layer might be more appropriate because any changes that you make to the metallic roughness, normals, or heights, it'll populate them throughout the whole shader rather than just like the areas that you've just painted on, for instance. So let's look at this in terms of a fill layer. So if I just go here, now by default, usually it's just a color one that is on, but you can enable and disable other ones as well. So I'm going to turn on the metal, roughness, and we'll turn on the normals as well, and the height one actually. So let's just say I want to change the base color. So rather than just using a color, I might want to use, say, maybe a texture that I brought in from a website, for instance. Well, if I click on here, I can look for various different textures that I want to use. So let's say I want to go for this camo, for instance, and you see now that it adds in that texture, and sometimes it'll bring over some parameters that I can alter and change as well. I can do the same here with the metallic one as well. So I can click on here. So maybe I want a specific metallic texture applied. So let's just say like metal, for instance, by bringing, say, this, and you can see now that that metallic element is kind of coming through. Increase the scale of it. Tile it again. You can see now that I've got this as a metallic texture on my model. And you can see the metallic elements are kind of coming through. Again, and you can do the same with all around here as well. So say if I go for, like, say, a grunge, A lot of times when people are adding in roughness maps, especially when you do like sort of like that dirt and grimy, Subspinner has like a ton of grunge maps that you can use. So let's say if I use this dirt and grime here, and you can see I have a nice sort of layer of dirt and grime added on to my material. Same with height as well. So if you want to kind of add some height to your model or to your texture, sorry. So let's just say we'll stick with the grunge for now. Let's see what we can get. Let's go with this, and you can see now that it's adding that kind of that sort of dirt and grime, sort of bumpiness to it. Because with a height map, it works in black and white. It's white being height and black being more depth. You can do the same with normals as well. So if you have like a normal map or some normal materials, you can search for a few of them as well. So let's just say, okay, I want this bevel added in, and you can see that that bevel has now come through as well. If I just see if I can increase this, any attributes that I can change. Not much attributes I can change for that one, sadly. Now, what I can do as well with the fill layer is I can actually increase the amount of time there is. So if I say, okay, I want to tile this 4 times, it repeats this material 4 times, or I can back up to like 32. So sometimes if, say, the tiling is set to 1, it's like, actually, this looks a bit not great. I could just always increase and be like, actually, something like, say, 2 times might be more appropriate. You can change the rotation as well. And you also have the projection option as well, which isn't available in the paint layer. So it's how it's projected onto the model, onto the shader. So it can do like say UV projection. So it's based off of the UV shells. There's triplanar projection, which try to kind of nicely kind of wrap around the whole model. So you can see like how it kind of wraps around quite nicely. It does a very good job of hiding the seams as well. But sometimes there might be some deformities that you might not like, so it's worth kind of playing around with the sort of different options that are available. So say like you've got like say planar projection here, so you have these little helpers that you can kind of move around to help project it. And you can see with like the plane one, you can see that there is some stretching here. So maybe something like say again triplanar, I see that stretching is pretty much gone, and you can move around this box as well, so kind of changes or influences how the projection is done as well. And lastly, I want to show that you can actually change the blending options and the strength or the opacity of some of these layers. And you can actually change them based on, say, the base color, metallic, roughness, normal, or heights. So you can actually change, okay, how strong or how visible these elements are. So for example, say base color, if I was to put this to, say, 0, now the color is gone, but you can still see that the height information, the normals, the roughness elements are still present because their opacity is still at 100%. So if I just put this back to 100, change to say the height, for instance, and if I write that to 0, again, the height information is no longer visible because you set the opacity to 0. This is really useful, especially when it comes to say height and maybe roughness sometimes, where it's like, okay, at 100, it feels a bit too strong. So sometimes just kind of bring it down a little bit can kind of add that sort of nice subtlety. So say here, for instance, it's got a nice sort of bumpy, grainy element to it, which looks a lot more subtler compared to, say, this 100% opacity. Whereas like here, it's like, okay, if I bring it down to like, say, 6, this looks pretty subtle, essentially. You also have blending options. Just like in Photoshop, you can actually change how different layers interact with one another. And like in Photoshop as well, obviously, whichever layer is on top kind of takes precedence. So for instance, the fill layer is at the top. You can't see anything from the paint layer because this fills the whole shader. That means we can't see anything from the paint layer. However, if I bring this to the top, that paint layer is now in front of it in the hierarchy, which means that it's visible, and then anything below it is also visible as well, as long as it's not kind of like, sharing the same space. But for instance, let's say I wanted to kind of blend this in with the bottom layer. I could go, say, for example, here under normal, I could go through and change it. Maybe I can multiply it, for instance. So I'm kind of bleeding in the base color by multiplying it along. And I could probably maybe just bring it down a little bit to be like, okay, that maybe looks like someone's like maybe tagged this, for instance, or I might have graffitied it. It looks more natural, like say there, than compared to say 100%, and then that sort of normal blending option. So you can kind of play around with these to see what kind of works well. And again, it's all based on the channel. So at that point, I was changing the blend option for the color. So if I go to say metallic, which we've got here, for instance, I could go in and change that, multiply it for instance, or I can change the opacity to it, then blend it in different ways to see what works nicely um, with this model. So this is a quick overview of the layer options, overview of the channels, and what you can do with them with the blending options. So the main thing is to kind of practice and experiment with it, see what works for you, and just have a look at real world reference images or references that you see with your own eyes or when you're going around, and just try to make something that looks nice and detailed and realistic. If that's what you're going for, if you're going for realistic sort of look, or something that's like passable or believable, observing the real world, seeing how materials work together, how the surfaces interact with one another, really helps to add that extra layer of realism to your texture work.